Good evening, everyone. Time for another member update. Now, this is the big picture view from netdata.com. This is the monthly silver chart, and you can see we've got that key rounding up now of this red line on the MACD. That's actually fairly significant. You can see the last time we had that was all the way back in roughly September of 2012, so it's been quite a while, and that one failed fairly quickly. This one looks like it wants to cross over, and I'm expecting quite a significant move in the price of silver when this crosses over. This is going to be, in my opinion, even a larger move than this move here, and that's just based on the MACD and how undervalued silver is, in my opinion. Now we're going to look more at the Ukrainian theater, I'll call it, but first we want to talk about silver a little bit here. This is the latest SRS Rocco, Steve St. Angelo, and you can see here that now you remember that the Silver Eagles are on a rationing program. I've covered before, rationing means shortage. Shortage means a market that's not free, a market that's interfered with, and the inability of prices to cover for the discrepancy, and that means manipulation. But let's look at this. It's amazing. We're talking about 121-to-1 ratio now on the silver to gold eagles. In interesting irony, investors are purchasing record amounts of silver eagles while the top primary silver miners continue to lose money. Now, this is something I've talked about. Those of you who have followed me for quite some time know that I've always warned against investing in mining stocks, and that's because if there's a suppression of the price of the precious metals, that means that they're guaranteed losers. We're continuing to see that. Not only did investors purchase the most silver eagles in the month of February compared to previous years, but the silver gold ratio is off the charts. In February of 2013, investors purchased 3,368,000 silver eagles and 80,000 ounces of gold. Thus, we had a silver eagle ratio of 42-to-1. This year, investors purchased 3,750,000 silver eagles compared to 31,000 1-ounce gold eagles. This is a staggering 121-to-1 ratio, and you can see that. There's the chart. The chart shows that the silver-gold ratio for the past 4 years, including the 70-to-1 ratio for the beginning of 2014, calculated a few weeks ago. If we update the total sales for 2014, presently we have 9 million versus 123,000 ounces for gold, and that's a 77-to-1 ratio. As I mentioned in my last Silver Eagle article, public affairs person Michael White stated in an email that the total allocation, again allocation, that's rationing, for the last week of February was 1.25 million. Last Friday, the U.S. Mint updated their figures, showing a total of 3.75 million for February, another complete sellout of their weekly allocated amount. And you can see that in this chart. Furthermore, the U.S. Mint sold 903,000 Silver Eagles as of Tuesday, March 4th. The total allocated Silver Eagle amount for this week is 1.1 million, which means 82% of the total Silver Eagles allocated to the authorized dealers have already been purchased in the first 2 days of this week. I would imagine the total allotment of 1.1 million Silver Eagles will be sold by the end of the week. Top primary silver miners continue to lose money. The fourth quarter results are out from most of the primary silver miners, and again we see continued losses. And here they are. Here's Pan American Silver, Coeur d'Alene Mining, and Hecla Mining. You can see that 84 million, 25 million, and $3 million losses. These top three primary silver miners basically gave away 13.6 million ounces of silver for free. And it goes on. So you can read that in the comments. Excellent stuff from Steve St. Angelo. How long can this go on? It's complete insanity to have 121 to 1 ratio. But that's what's happening, and we know that it's only going to get worse. Normally, just by going by memory, don't quote me on this, but normally by March and April of the year, the Silver Eagle thing has evened itself out, and the big rush stops, and the allocation tends to ease. We're not seeing that this year, and you can see from the charts that this year is off the chart compared to the previous year. So investors continue to stack silver, and I think that those investors, if I'm correct about this chart, are going to be proven to be wildly correct in their bullish beliefs, and they will be greatly rewarded for what they've done. Now, let's get over to this Ukrainian theater, I'll call it. Now, if you remember the video I did the last time on the Ukraine and what's going on, I tried to show you how the news stories coming out of the Ukraine were matching up against the currency events, and it seemed that the United States was staging events, and those events were aligned with certain currency events, and there was an intent to manipulate things. Now, there's a lot of commentary right now. You can see here's an example. This is from the Economic Collapse blog, and the headline is, Obama and Putin are trapped in a macho game of chicken, and the whole world could pay the price. Now, I'm going to say, after looking at all the news and trying to look at all the facts, you can agree or disagree. I am starting to become convinced that this is just a gigantic theater that we're looking at here, and that actually what we're talking about, and I'm going to try to prove that to you, is that we're talking about these powers divvying up a sovereign nation, and this is a technique that they're using to do so. Now, some of these stories are just absolutely ridiculous. Some are absurd, and some are completely unbelievable. We've covered on our blog the video evidence of the maiden snipers shooting their own people. The uprising and overthrow of the Ukrainian government was ridiculous on its face. It didn't make any sense. You had these people running around with these makeshift shields. Supposedly they took over this area of Kiev, and then the president fled. None of that makes any sense. Then we can see the video evidence that apparently there was some type of staging of this sniper fire. Now, we also have this absolutely bizarre resignation by this RT commentator. And what's so bizarre about this is that we know that there isn't any live news. And there's some delayed news, but I've never seen a live RT broadcast. Yet we're told, and we're expected to believe, that this gal over here did a live resignation on Russia Today. Well, that just doesn't make any sense at all. If you're Russia Today, then you either don't put her on the air if she's indicated she's going to do something like that, or you pull it once she starts diverting from the script. So that doesn't make any sense, and I don't believe there's even a delay. As far as I've seen in the past, all the RT episodes are canned long before they're aired. So what does that tell you? What does that tell you that RT actually went and ran this live resignation? Well, that it's theater. All of this is theater. Now, why is this theater occurring? Well, before I get to that, I wanted to have you look at this picture here. This is an example. There are a number of them out there. But this is called the Russian perspective. And all this is just a look at the world from Russia's view. And it's a very interesting viewpoint when you look at it from this perspective. First of all, you need to understand the history that Russia has been invaded multiple times. And most of the time, those invasions have come along this front right here. You can see this front. There's Moscow, there's St. Petersburg, and the invasion forces have come through the Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, Estonia, and I don't believe that there's an invasion that's come through Finland directly. But these are the buffer states for Russia. Now, we know during the Cold War, at one point or another, Russia pretty much controlled all of these states, as well as what is now called Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. One could argue it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to control Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, but it certainly makes sense for them to control Kazakhstan to prevent an invasion from China or India. And it certainly makes sense for them to control the Ukraine, which prevents a very large invasion from anywhere in the southern part of Europe. And if they add Belarus and these others, then that pretty much wraps it up. That creates a buffer for Russia. Now, what we're seeing is, my contention, we're seeing a division of the Ukraine. That's what's going on. That's what this theater is about. So let's look at it on Google Maps. Now, the first thing to notice here, and again, this is no longer from the Russian perspective, this is from this type of world perspective, and this is a Google Earth type of view. You have to remember, I've shown before that these are distorted. The size of the maps are distorted. Greenland is actually much smaller than Brazil, but when you look at it on these maps, it's twice the size. It's actually 1/3 the size. So you have to deal with the distortion, but there's not a lot of distortion here when we're talking about relative sizes. And it's very clear when you look at this map that the Ukraine is the largest nation in all of Europe here. It's larger than Germany by land mass. It's larger than France by land mass. It's larger than Spain in land mass. But if we cut the Ukraine right down the center, you can see that it perfectly lines up with that Russian perspective from Moscow. So if we cut the Ukraine right down here, and you have to remember also this warm water port issue, if the Ukraine is taken from Russia and Russia has no power or leases for these bases, Russia has no warm water port. Now that's very important because that's going to be an isolation of the Russian Empire completely. Now, as you know, I believe, or I've covered a couple of times mentioned, I believe that Daniel 7 is actually about the end time alignment. And if you want to understand that, I'm going to do a video on that soon on brotherjohnf.net to explain the biblical prophecy and how that relates to Russia, China, the US, UK, and the revived Roman Empire. But you can see here from this map, it's very clear. So what do I believe is going on here? This is what I believe is happening. If Russia and the EU sat down at a table and said, okay, we'll take the eastern half for Russia of the Ukraine, and you guys can take the western half of the Ukraine, what would the world reaction be? Well, of course, that's not allowed. You can't just divvy up a sovereign nation and one empire takes half and the other empire takes the other half. Yet we know, if you look at the ethnic maps, we know that most of this eastern side of the Ukraine, and again, these borders are not nation borders, they're state borders. Nations are peoples and nations and tongues, their ancestry, whereas a lot of the state borders are arbitrary borders that are drawn by political alliances. But if you look at the language map, you'll find that this right-hand side of the Ukraine pretty much is Russian and speaks the Russian language, while this left-hand side speaks the Ukrainian language. So it's my opinion that Russia and the EU and the US and the UK have decided that they're going to cut this nation in half and give the eastern half to Russia, the western half to the EU. And the reason why we see this Ukrainian theater is because they can't openly talk about that, because that would mean that the Ukrainian people have been betrayed by both sides. But that's going to be the end result, in my opinion, and that's what they intended from the very beginning, to cut Ukraine in half and give one half to Russia and one half to the EU. And we'll talk to you next time.